Hello once again everybody, it's Kevin with Kevin's Way Works. So every year for Christmas, I build something cool for my family. A few years ago, I built a virtual pinball cabinet. In 2023, it was a 9-foot shuffleboard table. For Christmas of 2024, I headed back to my childhood. So there was this electro-mechanical game from the 80s that I never forgot. It was called Ice Cold Beer, and it was made by a company called Taito back in 1983. So basically, it's a glass of beer. So it's a vertical yellow board. It has holes for beer bubbles, and it has a bar that holds a pinball, and it has 2 joysticks. And the goal is to get the ball in the lit hole without dropping it in any of the other holes. So I barely got to play it, but that game stuck in my head forever. I saw a remake video of it on YouTube last year, and I thought, I can build that. So I planned a full electromechanical build. I was going to use stepper motors, a Raspberry Pi, joysticks, belts, lead screws, all of which you could find all over the place online. So I drew it up in SketchUp, I made a parts list, and I was getting ready to buy all the parts. So I was on Steam and I saw Zeke's Peak there. And Zeke's Peak is basically the same board. I think the holes are even in the same place. So it's the same board as Ice Cold Beer, but it is made to be a kid-friendly version where you're basically climbing an icy cold mountain and you're trying not to fall in, the voids, which are the holes. So I did a little digging and I saw that they had also made Ice Cold Beer along with several other games, probably 2 or 3 dozen other games that follow the same concept. So I did a 180 and I decided that instead of having one game, I could build a vertical arcade cabinet using a PC and a TV, and that way I could play all of them. So I went online and I found the approximate measurements of the original Ice Cold Beer game so I could go ahead and draw up the cabinet. So using SketchUp, I drew up some plans and I determined that I needed a TV of about 43 inches in size. I went out to Walmart, found their cheapest 43-inch TV, and I grabbed it. The next stop was the hardware store and I grabbed 2 sheets of 3/4-inch plywood. So now I had to figure out how I was going to mark all this up. So I guess I could have printed everything out as SketchUp, taped all the pieces of paper together and made a giant template, but instead I just plotted all the points in SketchUp and I went ahead and marked them out on the plywood and then basically connected all the dots with a square and a level. Now, as you already saw, we used a CNC machine to cut out a couple of templates. Those templates, along with a router and a flush cut bit, will give us some really nice and perfectly cut curves. And I'm going to finish up this last little bit with a jigsaw so we can separate the first side panel from the rest of the plywood. Alright guys, now that we have this freed from the main sheet, I'm going to attach the template to the top. We're going to go ahead and cut the curves up here. Using the flush cut router bit, I'm going to make sure the clamps are placed to stay out of the router path as much as possible. I probably should have made these a little bigger because it would have helped to have a lot more space, but everything did work out fine in the end. I'll go ahead and clamp this template over the joystick area and we'll go ahead and get these round edges taken care of. Hi there everyone. I have to make a couple of passes on these curved areas. That's because I left a little bit of extra material since the jigsaw tends to cut at an angle. So as you can see, the clamp was in the way here, so there's a little bump. And I'm just going to clean up this area using the flat edge of the upper template. A couple clamps, and I'll go ahead and even up this with a flush cut bit. Feels and looks perfect. Alright guys, so what I'm doing here is I'm using the piece that we just finished. I'm going to flip it on its face on top of this other piece. We're going to go ahead and use it as a template to trace out the other side. Now I suppose I could cut this whole thing with a flush cut router bit, but man, that's going to be a lot of passes. It's a lot faster for me to cut about 1/8 of an inch outside the line using a circular saw for the straight edges, and we'll use a jigsaw for the curves again. I can't remember exactly, but I'm using either a 60 tooth or an 80 tooth fine finish blade for these cuts, as I want a nice clean edge with no chip out. This just makes things a lot easier later on when we get to the finishing stage. I'm just eyeballing things as I go, taking care to stay at least a 1/16 of an inch away from the line. I don't want to get any closer than that as I risk running over the line into the workpiece. Since this project is going to be painted, it's not a big deal, but filling and sanding does take additional time that we don't need to waste. I'm making my final pass here around this curved area, and I'll have this piece separated in just a few seconds. So let me just take this time to do a preemptive strike on the comments that I can sense are about to come in. Yes, I see it. Yes, I do know what it looks like. No, I'm not making any more. And no, this one is not for sale. So now that we're all clear with that, as I butt the edges of these two pieces together, I notice a few gaps in the layers that I'll have to plug up with some wood filler. Now that's totally normal stuff. It happens all the time. It's just your typical woodworking. Now that I have these two sides clamped, I'm going to take the same flush cut bit and run it all the way around the top and the front edge. As you saw, it started moving around on me, so I went ahead and clamped it to the sawhorses to keep everything in place. Keep an eye on what I'm doing here because I do make a mistake. I let the router tilt over the front edge, which could have allowed the router bit to make contact with the workpiece and take a gouge out of it. However, we did get lucky this time. And guys, we have a perfect match after running a router down the edge. Everything looks awesome. Okie dokie, I'm going to go ahead and get these clamps removed from the workpiece so we can go ahead and admire our work. And there you go, everyone. Two perfectly identical vertical arcade sides ready to go. All right, our mystery object is back. I'm going to go ahead and blur this just in case. Now, if you want to see the uncut and uncensored version, check me out over on Lumber Fans. But seriously, we're going to use every bit of this wood here. From this piece, we're going to get our top, our controller panel, our bottom panel, and even the base. This first piece I'm going to cut is the top panel. At this point, it's mostly cut to size, but we still have to finish cut the angled edge so it fits flush with the back of the cabinet. So what we're doing now is we're going to cut the back edge of the top piece to 12.2 degrees, and I'm going to use a Klein digital angle gauge to set this saw blade precisely to 12.2 degrees. So this cut does not have to be perfect, so if we are off by 1/10 of a degree or so, it's no biggie. And right now we're going to go ahead and rough cut the bottom piece and the controller panel. So this controller panel has to have an 18.3 degree angle on one edge, so we'll go ahead and use that Klein digital angle gauge again for that. And yes, guys, I noticed I did forget to lower the blade. As with any table saw, always take the same precaution, even with a saw stop. And since this doesn't fit on one sheet entirely, we're going to go ahead and cut the front lower panel on a new sheet of plywood. So let's go ahead and get this marked out. I'm going to rough cut by eye using a circular saw, and then we'll take it over and finish it on the table saw. So we'll go ahead and use the factory edge. Even though it's a little rough, it's still pretty straight, and we'll use it for squaring up the other side. I apologize for my crappy camera work. This was only my second or third time recording my work, and I didn't look at any of the footage until just recently. It seems like half the time I'm filming my back or my plumber's crack. I'm 6'5", I have no butt to hold up my pants, and I'm already wearing a tall shirt. So aside from wearing suspenders, there's not much else I can do. Anyway, I stopped short cutting this piece as I'll be using the rest of the wood for future projects. I'm using a semi-sharp 25-year-old handsaw here to free this front bottom panel from the rest of the plywood sheet. And the reason I'm stopping here is because I feel a lump in the edge as I'm trying to cut this, and so it's going to throw off my straight edge. And what I'm going to do now is just take a rasp. We'll go ahead and get this lump taken care of, and then I'll go ahead and run it through again. And now I'm going to check the panels just to make sure the widths are the same, because I did cut them after moving the guide, and they do line up perfectly. Now the front panel has to be pretty square because it could throw off the squareness of the whole machine. So I'm going to go ahead and check the diagonals, and they are exactly the same. And now I'm cutting the base to the final dimensions. And once again, we're going to use the handy Klein digital angle gauge, and we're going to use this to cut the top edge of the front panel to 14.1 degrees. And look at that, guys, I nailed it first try. Now that the angle is set, I run it through the table saw for a perfect cut. Alright, this little scrap piece right here from our mystery board, this is going to be ripped into strips, and those are going to be for the base support. I was able to get as much as I needed out of it. You'll see later on that there is a little issue with it, but we're going to go ahead and work around that. I probably could have cut things a little bit differently to avoid the issue you'll see in the future, but in the end, everything did turn out just fine. So this is a DeWalt DWS 779 miter saw, and it does not come with XPS. I figured out which parts were needed, and I bought them individually to basically give me that factory LED shadow that you can see here. And this was before people were selling the kits online, so it took me quite a little while to figure it out. Anyway, so we're cutting the base pieces to length now on the miter saw. And what I did is I cut the rear piece to the same length as the front piece, because I wasn't sure exactly how thick these pieces of plywood were going to be. And since they're overlapping on the back, I basically have to take off the equivalent of 2 sheets of plywood. So I'm just setting these on their edge, gonna mark them, and then we'll cut this down to size, and we'll have exactly the right length piece of wood. All right, guys, I have the base mocked up here. The front is gonna be full length to hide the side edges. The sides are gonna run all the way to the back, and this will help give a little bit of strength, and it also will give it a cleaner look. And I'm gonna go ahead, we're gonna call this the end of part 1. We have all the main panels cut, and we're ready for assembly. So stay tuned for part 2, where we do a rough assembly of the cabinet. So I hope you guys are liking that so far, and keep an eye out for part 2. And as always, guys, thank you for watching. Kevin's Way Works.